Cool.
So, what's Timo's take on?
Well, to be fair, all of my guitar playing friends can play Jimi Hendrix just as well as that, and they can probably sing just as well as that, but this guy's famous for it. And some of them get a little resentful about it, to be fair. But, he's got the goods. Now, if we're going to have singers who shred and we're going to include him, his singing's not that great. Like, well, Jimi Hendrix singing isn't that great either. It's kind of got its own thing. Then you have to have Stevie Ray Vaughan, because his singing isn't that great, but his guitar playing's killer. But you don't think of him as a singer, right? You think of him as a guitar player.
Yes, yeah, yeah. I mean, and we don't have Stevie Ray Vaughan. We don't have Jimi Hendrix. I think part of it, we have more episodes to come, but also I kind of felt like, yeah, we do know that that level of those guys so well. We know the Jimi Hendrix recording.
So I think the guitar playing, the singing, and the bass playing on that track were pretty much what that song has always been. What transformed the whole thing was Steve Jordan. That guy stole the show on that track all the way. That was some killer drumming right there. The backbeat, the interaction of the backbeat was so different than the original track, and it was so refreshing.
Yeah, and right off the top too, just
yeah, man.
Yeah, this is something going.
Yeah, that's why he's the first call guy. You're like, and of course you can, once you're familiar with Steve Jordan's playing, you're like, you can hear it in one note. You're like, what's the tone on the snare drum? Oh, that's Steve Jordan.
Yeah. Well, I think part of the resentment, like you said, that some people have about John Mayer is just, how does a guy that good looking get that good at the guitar? He's kind of got it all, and it's infuriating.
Yeah, maybe there's that. There's also a little bit of the business kind of picks and chooses who it's gonna pump and make big, because there's a million guys who can play guitar like that.
Yeah, but do they all have his looks? I mean, that's part of the...
Yeah, exactly. Or the charisma, or the ability to navigate the tricky waters of showbiz, and
Yeah, but I think the flip side to that is when you've got pop stars who take a pride and an interest in the instrumentation. It keeps that part of it alive and exposes a lot of people to, like, these musicians we're talking about. They go, ooh.
Yeah, that's the other way to look at it. That's right.
And I think that John Mayer brings that with the different things he does. And
Yeah, people would say that about something like Sublime, which is decidedly not reggae, but it would get people going towards actual Jamaican music once they liked that band so much. So you could, whereas people who are already into that kind of Jamaican music would be kind of resentful, like Sublime, really. And the same thing happens to John Mayer with inheriting some Jerry Garcia crown, or Fish inheriting the Grateful Dead crown when Jerry died. It was like, it just doesn't seem like this deserve that, so everyone's going to take shots at you when you're on the pedestal, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and also you got to have some cojones too to hire guys like Steve Jordan and Pino Palladino and say, I'm not going to make a fool of myself in front of these guys. I got to have my act together to hang with these cats. So that's good to see.
And the other thing is that you can elevate your like I said, a million guitar players can play guitar as well as him. So what you do if you're famous and have the budget is you get the killer band, and that elevates you like crazy.
Yeah,
huh?
Absolutely. And to go and say, hey, I'm going to go trade licks with Charlie Hunter. That you gotta.
Well, he's a very modest cat.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm hanging out with Charlie. Yeah, he's a very, very, very modest dude.
Yeah. But anyway, you don't want to look like a fool in front of that guy either. So he's woodshedding it before he gets in the room. Like that. So anyway, let's move on to the guy we talked about earlier that we had kind of forgotten about in terms of pop stars who are great at performing their instruments, and that's Jose Feliciano.
I grew up with this guy because I'm from Los Angeles, and there's such a large Mexican population there, so you just grow up with lots of things Mexicanos, right? And I'm looking here, and he's from Puerto Rico, so he's more of an East Coast Caribbean guy, huh? I didn't had no idea. I always thought he was a Mexican guy.
Yeah, he was born in Puerto Rico, and he was blinded from congenital glaucoma. And then his family moved to Spanish Harlem in New York City, when he was just 5 years old.
Ah,
And he started playing around in the folk clubs and things, back in I guess it would be the early '60s, and doing, his kind of solo act, and then
so he must have rubbed shoulders with Bob Dylan.
I think
Sounds like the same scene.
yeah, I think he was around in that kind of folk scene, that Greenwich Village thing, and then kind of what's interesting about him too is he's kind of a fusion of Latin and jazz and blues, soul, rock. He kind of incorporated these elements into that style of his, coming from the Latin guitar thing, and his big hit.
But he was allowed to be on, in a sense, what do I want to say, like white radio, American radio, whereas he's Spanish speaking. He's Jose Feliciano. How did he cross over? That was rare at the time.
Yeah, and I think it was part of that era of when the top 10 songs you'd hear on the radio was Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, the Beatles. It was all this golden age of pop and rock, and he was definitely a part of that. One of his big hits was "Light My Fire" by the Doors. So
I remember it on the radio.
remember
Yeah,
that?
for
That was
sure.
Feliz Navidad. Yeah, so some of his hits were covers of other pop hits that he kind of turned into his own thing. And
But do you remember how there were certain LPs that were ubiquitous? Like everybody seemed to have a copy of this record or that record, and that his record. I remember it's like got a cartoonish picture of him with his sunglasses on playing guitar, and that record was ubiquitous back in the day.
yeah, and because he was a great performer and all that. I mean, he had got a lot of TV exposure. I remember seeing him on TV many times as a kid. But he cites as some of his biggest influences were Segovia and West Montgomery.
That's crazy. Wow. So is there any clips of him playing real jazz?
I don't know about that. And as a matter of fact, the cut I chose, and I chose this cut it's a little bit of a joke here on our show, is that hey, he did a bluegrass song. Okay, that's the one I'm playing.
Of course, yeah. The Ethan bias for bluegrass.
Exactly.
Right?
So I get to choose the songs.
It's my show. I can do what I want.
So this is off an album called "The Voice and Guitar of Jose Feliciano," and it's the Mule Skinner Blues, which was a Jimmy Rodgers song that was popularized by Bill Monroe.
Now, are you talking about country Jimmy Rodgers or blues Jimmy Rodgers?
We're talking about early country Jimmy Rodgers. One of the founding fathers of the genre, and I think he's credited with writing the song. But Bill Monroe turned it into one of his big hits. And anyway, I thought because of Jose's cross-cultural kind of connections, that this was a unique side to him that really surprised me. Like, wow, he was also listening to these cats. So here's Jose Feliciano's take on Mule Skinner Blues.